I have an idea of the answer, and some of them I don't have an idea of the answer, and probably some of them I have an idea that's incorrect about the answer. So for this morning's text, we're looking at Daniel chapter 12. Also, welcome to my mom and dad. My mom and dad showed up this morning, so thanks for being here. It's a real encouragement to have you here. So we're looking in Daniel chapter 12, and we are in verse 4, and we're looking at from Daniel chapter 12:4 until the end, and we're looking at what is the final week of Daniel chapter 9. We're looking at the Great Tribulation and at the timing of these events. So this is just a very interesting period here. This is the time from where the abomination of desolation is set up, where there's a desolate screen there. From the middle of the tribulation until the end is the period that we're looking at this morning. Reading, first of all, looking in chapter 12, verse 4, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." So here we see Daniel is told to shut up the words, to seal this book. So the stamp of God's approval is put upon this book. And now I also have another verse that I really think is just very interesting. If you want to turn to Revelation 22, I have quite a few references this morning, so I hope you don't get tired of looking up different references. But Revelation 22, verse 10 says, "And he said unto me, seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand." So very interesting. So John the Revelator in the book of Revelation is told not to seal up his prophecy because the time is closer. The time of the end is at hand in the time of John the Revelator, but during Daniel's time, these prophecies are sealed up. So it's just a very interesting note there to make. So the time we're looking at starts right in the middle there. The abomination of desolation has been set up. We're looking at the Great Tribulation, which goes from where the abomination of desolation is set up until the second coming of Christ. And John Lapp had asked me a little bit last Sunday where I think some of the tribulation events that we read of in Revelation, how those are placed. I personally believe that the seal judgments 1 through 6 are during this period. Most of those are natural disasters and that type of thing. And then the final seal judgment and the 7 trumpet judgments happen during somewhere in the early tribulation, and toward the very end we have the 7 bowl judgments of God. So if you want to just kind of have a little bit of an idea, and each set of 7 judgments is progressively worse. And we're going to read in Revelation, if we have the time, of those 7 bowl judgments, which are the worst of the worst set of the 4 judgments. So moving on into Daniel chapter 4 here, and "O Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book." This book is now sealed. I thought of another thing. If you ever canned peaches, if they're peaches that you're going to eat soon, maybe you would use the ones that didn't seal for the peaches you're going to eat soon, and the ones that are for a long period in the future, you're going to seal those up. So maybe that's something to think about. So in Revelation, we had some peaches that are open, and we need to eat those. Those are going to be happening shortly. So I thought that was, something that stuck in my mind. "Even to the time of the end, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." And I think this specifically speaks of knowledge that might be even about the time of the end. And I think there's going to be, and already is, a beginning of more opening of people's minds to understanding the time of the end and understanding the way things are going to unfold, and a little bit of more of an openness to digging through some of those things. So I believe this knowledge is going to include an understanding of Daniel and an understanding of his prophecies. And I think this is a good time to go across what are some things that we are pretty sure of about the end times from the book of Daniel, regardless of your prophetic beliefs. And again, if you have prophetic beliefs that are different than mine, That's okay. I love you and I accept you with your beliefs the way they are. And that's just fine, and it doesn't need to be a point of contention between people. So we know that there's going to be a world ruler who is utterly opposed to God that is going to rise up. He's going to have a world religion based on the abomination of desolation. We know there's going to be a world war in which this ruler is defeated not at the hands of a man. We know that there's going to be a time of great tribulation for Israel lasting 3.5 years. We know that there's going to be deliverance for the people of God after the end of this tribulation. We know that there's going to be a resurrection of the dead and a judgment of the evildoers, and there's going to be a reward for the righteous. So those are some things that are very clearly brought out in the book of Daniel, and that just really, I think, is something that as Christians, when we start to see these things happening, our eyes are going to be opened to those things, and we're going to say, "Oh, there that is. Oh, that explains that." Maybe your beliefs about the end times were a little bit distorted, and you realize, "Oh, that's how that works," And it's just going to be a time of revealing and understanding how everything fits together. Looking into verse 5, we have Daniel having some questions about this. "And I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, and one on this side of the river bank, with this side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, How long shall it be to the end of these wonders?" Verse 7, "And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished." The fulfillment of these things and the end of these wonders. So what are these wonders that we're talking about here? Well, I believe it speaks about the prophecy of the willful king that we looked at the end of the last chapter. We looked at the willful king doing what was good in his sight. It's speaking about what I believe is the Antichrist. It could include the rest of the chapter, but it seems to be specifically speaking about that part of it, and it gives the sense that God has a prophetic timetable. Daniel is asking for the time for this period of time, like how long is this going to take? And Daniel expects that God has a timetable upon which all these prophetic events are going to happen. And that is just a very interesting thing to consider. If you don't mind just backing up into chapter 11 and looking at verse 27, we see God appointing the times that these things are going to happen. In verse 27, "And both kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed." So this end is going to happen at the time where God appoints that this end is to happen. In verse 29, again, looking down there, "At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south." So God has appointed this time for this action, this time for this action. 11:35, "And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge, and to make them white even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed." So God has appointed these times to happen on his timetable in following a timetable. Does God's timetable look like that one up there? Maybe, maybe not. But we do know that God has appointed times for all these things to happen. And if there's one message that I would like to get across from the prophecies of the book of Daniel, it's that God is sovereign, and things happen when God says they're going to happen. Things happen when God says they're going to happen. God is sovereign. God is in control. Things in this world do not happen just because they were going to happen. Think about that. All these things that you see happening in the world today, they're all right on time. Isn't that just an amazing thought? Looking at, it speaks of swore by him who lives forever. looking on into the man that's clothed in linen, and he is swearing here. So he holds up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and he sware by him that liveth forever. So who's he swearing by? He's swearing by God. He's swearing by the eternal God. If you think of in Psalm 90, verse 2, it speaks of him who there is no God before or after. So there's nothing that's going to happen before the existence of God. There's nothing that's going to happen after the existence of God. So God consumes the entirety of all time. And I just always am like a little bit boggled, especially your mind kind of struggles to, I mean, yeah, you could have something that lasts forever, but can you have something that never had a start? Like, so it had to start somewhere, right? You know, I can sort of get the idea of it never ended, but how did it never start? Like, so so what happened before that, you know? And it just kind of boggles your mind. And you think of like God speaking of the Alpha and Omega. Well, that's the beginning and end of the Greek alphabet. He speaks of himself as I am the Alpha and Omega. I am the beginning and the end. So God continues to live forever, and he is the man that is, he is the God that is sworn by this being. And this being, again, we believe was Jesus Christ. And very interestingly, so where did these two men come from? So now we have two men show up before the swearing of this oath, and one is on one bank and one is on the other. If you remember back in, well, this is from Deuteronomy 19:15, the Old Testament Levitical law was that to swear an oath or to be in a court where you swore an oath, you needed two witnesses to that oath. And that then you stamped your seal, and you swore that oath to do these things, and there was two witnesses that would sign off that they witnessed this oath. So often when you fill out important documents, you'll have a spot where you're supposed to sign, and then you'll have a spot where witnesses sign that they saw you sign this paper. And in 2 Corinthians 13:1, Paul speaks about, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word shall be established. And that's quoting the Old Testament law of Deuteronomy 19:15. So here we have two witnesses that show up to sign their names to the oath that is sworn here. And Daniel is the third witness. What does a witness need to be? Daniel was a witness. A witness needs to have an honest reputation. He needs to be well known for honesty, for truthfulness. He needs to know the facts. Daniel knew all these prophecies. He had written these down. And he needs to be willing to tell others when it's required of him. When you say, so what happened? Did you see him sign this paper? Yes, I did. I swear that or affirm that I saw this person sign this piece of paper. So Daniel takes part as a third witness of this oath. So, questions, thoughts? Anybody have anything that they want to share or think about, like for these couple verses here before we keep going? Anything you want to share that you know has stood out for you in any part of this chapter up till this point, or anything that's stood out to you? Okay, we'll keep moving along. Looking in Daniel chapter 7, so what did this man swear to? And this, I believe, is Jesus Christ, by the way. We had looked at him in chapter 10, and we had compared him with Jesus Christ in the book of Revelation and seen how closely compared they are between Jesus Christ in the book of Revelation and this angelic messenger in Daniel chapter 10. This is the continuation of the vision. So the vision was in Daniel chapter 11, and then we continue with looking at the angelic messenger in chapter 12. So what did he swear to? And so he lifts his right hand, he lifts his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and a half. So 3.5 years is what he swears to. And when he shall have accomplished to shatter the power of the holy people, all things shall be finished. So that's just a very interesting period. So he's talking about 3.5 years. Well, if you take 7 years and you split it in half, you end up with a 3.5-year period that fits very nicely into there. I have a bunch of other references that refer to this 3.5-year period. I'm not going to read them all just because I don't want to eat up all our time, but Daniel chapter 7:25 describes it as the period that the saints are given into the Antichrist's hands. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 describes it as the period between the breaking of Antichrist's covenant with Israel, the erection of the abomination of desolation, and the establishment of Jesus' kingdom. Daniel chapter 12:7 describes it as the duration of the time of trouble for Israel. Revelation 11:2 describes it as the period that the holy city will be tread underfoot by the Gentiles. Revelation 11:3 describes it as the period of ministry for the two witnesses. Revelation 12:6 and 12:14 describe it as the period that Israel, perhaps only a remnant of Israel, is preserved by God in the wilderness. Revelation 13:5 describes it as the duration of the Antichrist's authority to rule, persecute, and blaspheme. Taking all these together, we are obviously dealing with the last half of Daniel's 70th week, which is the Great Tribulation, and we know very little about the first half, except I believe the first 6 of the seal judgments happened during that period, so we do know a little bit about the first half. So this fits very well into the rest of Daniel's prophecies. So what's going to happen during this time? He shall have accomplished to shatter the power of the holy people. He is going to break apart any semblance of power that the holy people have into little tiny fragments. There is going to be very little left. The holy people are completely shattered. This is the Antichrist persecution of the holy people. Who's the holy people referring to? It's referring to the Jews. And at that time, all these things shall be finished. Well, what's all these things? So what all got finished right here? So when we read this verse, all these things, what all happened? It's number one, it's the return of the people to Israel. The people have gone back to their homeland. They've built the city of Jerusalem back. They've rebuilt the temple. Number two, it's the coming prince of chapter 9, coming to be cut off. Number three, it's God's judgment on the Antichrist and his followers that happens during the end of the period of great tribulation, or during that period and at the end of that period. Number four, it's when Jesus conquers the Antichrist, as we read in Revelation 19. It is when the Antichrist has been conquered and thrown into the lake of fire. Number five, it's the deliverance of the suffering Jews from the tribulation. Those who have gone through this great tribulation have now been saved and delivered and set apart, and delivered by God, by Jesus, and now have a saving faith in Jesus Christ. Number six, it's the end of the Gentile supremacy. During the period of the church age is when the Gentiles had a specific ministry that Jesus and God had reached out to the church of the Gentiles, and this is the end of that age. This is the end of the church age at this time. Number seven, Jesus, as the little stone that we read about in Daniel chapter 2, will destroy the nations of this earth. Jesus will hit the bottom of that statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream, and it's all going to come tumbling down into tiny little pieces. Number eight, it's the return of the Jewish people to a right relationship with God and a saving faith in Jesus Christ. That is all these things that are going to be accomplished. And what does it say? All these things shall be finished. Isn't it? Don't you think about Jesus Christ on the cross when he said, "It is finished"? It is finished. Like, this is the final. It's finished from here on out. There's no more turning back and asking God for salvation from sin. There is no turning back from your choice to live an impure life. There is no, this is the end. There is no more going to church. There is no more, we're going to live with Jesus Christ in heaven. First of all, a millennial kingdom here on earth, I believe, and then a time in the heaven. But the age of opportunity and the time of sanctification of the church and the time of choosing where you're going to spend eternity has ended at that point. So just such a closeout of the end of the age. That's just very interesting. And we see here Daniel, and I heard and I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? So Daniel doesn't understand it, and that gives me a lot of comfort, because if Daniel doesn't understand these things, certainly I don't have to understand all these things either. So Daniel, with all his prophetic knowledge and understanding, did not have an exact understanding of what they were talking about here, and he's asking for a more detailed understanding. I understood not. I said, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? So we don't have to understand everything that's written in this book. We don't have to understand everything we dug through over the last half year. But we can trust in God that He will bring these things to pass in the time that He has appointed them, and we can rest in that promise. Any thoughts? Just we'll open it up for a bit. What do you see in these verses or this passage? Anything else that just stands out to you? Where do I think we're at? Well, I think we're before the rapture of the church somewhere here. So, because I don't believe the church has been raptured yet. How close are we to that rapture? That's a very good question. I don't know. And I wish it would be very interesting to know that. And we don't have the time or the hour, but we can see some of those things starting to happen. And I believe it's not terribly far away, but I don't know. I like this idea. So the latest generation is now called the millennials. I like the idea that the millennials will rule with Jesus in the millennium kingdom that's spoken about. So I like the idea that the people that are millennials today, that they'll spend a millennium with Jesus Christ. So hopefully so. It's just an interesting play on words, but I don't know. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? You're pointing to something. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying. We really don't know. We're supposed to put this in so that when it happens, we'll know.
Mm-hmm.
Not before then, people get into arguments over things they don't know. And that God, He really does things when He does them, and it makes sense. And what I keep getting is, it's encouraging me, is that everything that I know in life has conclusion. And it's hard to let go. Some of the good things you don't want them to end. But God has a new beginning or end. And that's, I've been recently meditating in 2 Corinthians on the outward man that perishes. The outward man is my mind. If I'm struggling with depression and anxiety, my emotions and my body, all that perishes. And that's all part of my outward man that's going to fall away.
Mm.
And the Spirit of God is forever. And that's who I listen to, and that's what I stood for.
Amen.
So it's confirming and encouraging where I'm at.
Thank you. That's a beautiful testimony, Though the outward man perish, there's...
Emotions in your mind are part of the outward man.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Like the coronavirus has changed the world so much, do you think the rapture of the church would be the catalyst that triggers this global government and the rise of the Antichrist? Like there'll be a panic of somebody got to take charge and someone does?
So I don't believe the rapture triggers the time of the tribulation. I believe the time of the tribulation triggers the rapture. So the time at the beginning of the tribulation begins when the Antichrist makes his agreement and treaty with the nation of Israel. And I believe that is the beginning of the time of the tribulation. But I believe God, in his mercy for the church, raptures his people before that time. How far before that time, or exactly what that timetable looks like, we don't have I don't believe we have a lot of detail there. But I believe that because this time that is appointed for the Antichrist comes, God in his mercy removes his church before then. But I don't believe the rapture triggers that time. I believe that time triggers the rapture. Is that, I don't know. Is that, maybe it's all the same, but I think it's kind of the other way, like very, very similar. Certainly the rapture, I believe, happens before this time. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think more than likely the Antichrist is going to be in existence and before this time. So the beginning of this tribulation period starts when the Antichrist makes his commitment and makes his agreement with the nation of Israel. So will we see the Antichrist before that time, and will we realize that that's the Antichrist before? I don't know. I think we probably will, but it makes it seem like the mark of the beast happens specifically during the first half, while like we talked about before, the Antichrist is the satanic equivalent of Jesus Christ, with a 3.5-year ministry where he encourages people to commit to him as their Christ rather than to the true Christ, and that happens during his ministry, his 3.5-year satanic ministry that begins at the beginning of the commitment with Israel until the time when he sets himself out as the abomination of desolation. So I don't believe we're going to actually see the mark of the beast. Probably not, but I think we're going to see the Antichrist rise to power, very likely. So that's my thought on the events there. And again, I'm not the end-all be-all, but that's the way I believe the order that things would happen.
Do you have any thought what the church will be doing these 7 years?
During these 7 years, well, I believe they're going to be up in heaven with Jesus Christ, and I hope we're going to be able to watch all these things happen, because now, after I have such an interest in this, I would like to see how, once you read a storybook, you want to see how the end goes. So I believe we're going to be raptured before the time of this time, and there's a whole bunch of references there where you can look at the day of Jesus Christ, where he's takes the church away. And I believe we're going to be in heaven worshiping God with Jesus Christ during this period of 7 years. And during this period of 7 years is when the Antichrist becomes his satanic, begins and has his satanic ministry during this period. And he also sets himself up as the abomination of desolation. And then this is also the period where God chooses to bring the 144,000 Jewish witnesses, which will evangelize to the Jewish people and bring them into a saving faith with Jesus Christ, so that they will be up there in heaven with us. The Jewish nation, there's going to be millions of Jews that are going to be in heaven with us because of God's mercy in extending that period specifically for the Jews. I believe there's going to be Gentiles saved as well during this period, but the emphasis of this period is for the salvation of the Jewish nation. And the veil that Corinthians speaks about that is hiding their eyes from the truth will be opened up, and they'll be able to see the salvation message and the gospel message will be made new to them. Their eyes are still, like, they see these things through a veil. They still don't see them clearly, but God is going to make himself so real to them that they're going to change, and they're going to become, they're going to be changed into Christians because of the message of these 144,000 evangelists.
So is that what you're saying is the Great Revival?
Yes. So the Great Revival is where the 144,000 Jews will evangelize to the Jewish nation. But during this time, I mean, you could take it as a satanic revival too, because this is during the very same time when the Antichrist is setting up his, establishing his domain.
Obviously, a lot of this is also speculation, but like, there's great details in Daniel and Revelations about the 7-year tribulation and stuff. And as I believe, you know, we'll be wrapped up before this happens. So why do you think there's so many little details in this 7 years in the Bible?
Because I believe the Jews, as they're evangelized by these 144,000, they're going to go back to the book of Daniel with a fresh set of eyes. And they're going to be like, oh, that's what that was talking about. The veil has been lifted. So why all these details are in here, I don't believe it's so much for us. It's for the Jews who are going to be digging all through this during the time of the tribulation, as they realize how they need to change their focus from looking for a Messiah to looking toward they need to look back for their Messiah. They can't look forward to their Messiah. They need to look back to their Old Testament and their prophecies to find their Messiah. And I believe all these details are in here not for the church, but for the Jews that will be saved during this time. Yeah. So, absolutely. I think there's going to be a massive revival, because they're like Jews and Gentiles alike, they're going to see how all these things are fulfilled